Hey there, welcome to the Ryan Kingsline Show. My name's Ryan Kingsline, and in this podcast, we interview amazing artists, creatives, and creators to find out how they tick and how they got where they are today. So sit back, relax. I look forward to sharing their journey with you. Okay, well, let's get this started. So, Renaud, I'm saying the first name correctly, right?
Yes.
Okay. So great to meet you. Thank you so much for coming in. And so what you do is it's a little outside of the scope of what I teach, but it's just so beautiful. And I wanted to really get to know a little bit about both this UX designer side of things, which one of my students just went and got a job as a, not UX, but UI designer. I'm not meaning to conflate those. And then get a sense of this build a game in 3 days. Because, you're talking to a bunch of people that are all 3D, so we don't build anything in 3 days. It's like, that's when we get the high res done. But you're building these things in 3 days. And so I really want to just get to know a little bit about what you do, how you operate, how you make your money, so to speak, like what you do for a career and all that stuff. So why don't we start with, what do you do today? What's your day job?
Okay. Right now I'm working at Ubisoft Montreal I lead a prototype team there on an unannounced project.
Okay.
Basically, my day-to-day is creating parts of a game, focused features, and making sure they are fun, that they are doable, that they match with our objectives and so on, and having people test that so we get actual data and can take decisions based on that.
Are these games that eventually become larger in scale and are done in 3D, or are these done in 2D?
I can't really talk about this project, but in general, these are large projects in like big games. Ubisoft doesn't really do small games.
Yes, right.
Big.
So what's the purpose of prototyping? I know you can't talk about that specific game, but what I'm getting at here is, a lot of times when I'm talking to people about game arts, it's like, I'm going to be a character sculptor because they see it on ArtStation. They see somebody out there. But games is an entire universe beyond, just concept artist, character artist, right? There's a lot more involved in this. And that's what I wanted to kind of unpack. So what's the purpose of prototyping?
So I come from web and mobile apps, like serious stuff before that. And when I used to work in that field, we would work on large projects, like large stuff. And I've always had this idea that instead of going full on production, it was much better to just sort of create something small, see if it works, even test that with actual people. And that's basically the same idea for games. So creating a game, as you said, it's a massive enterprise. Just the 3D aspect of things is extremely time consuming, but that's the same for pretty much all fields, like networking, programming, all that takes a long time. So instead of going into a 2 years, maybe 3 years production, sometimes much more than that, what I like to do is create a tiny, not even a vertical slice, but really something extremely simple, focused on usually the most used features of the game. So let's say you want to do Mario or something like that. You just create a prototype where you have a cube that jumps. And if jumping is fun on its own, then of course, if you improve the graphics, if you add more content, if you create all the mechanics that make a game, then it's probably going to be fun. But your core mechanics have to be super fun. And taking that at scale, the idea is to do that for the main feature, but also do that for the features of a game. Maybe does the options menu open. You could do that in a small prototype and have fun and iterate and try many solutions to that specific problem and have them tested. And that's the idea of prototyping.
One of the things I remember reading about a while ago, there was Raiders of the Lost Ark, and they went to a game studio to have them produce a game. And instead of them building out this brand new game and doing all this stuff, they just took this project that they'd been doing internally, which is just like a racing game. And it was fun to play as a racing game, and then turned it into that whole kart scene in the mines where, they're in, and it was a huge hit, huge success. And the real big takeaway there was that games we talk a lot about story, But the underlying part of this is, I think, what you're calling core mechanics, the gameplay of it. Like, is it fun?
Exactly. Yeah.
So what are the elements of fun, I guess, is where I'm going with this.
Fun is really what I focus on. I also do prototypes that are focused on art, like trying to find the right shaders, stuff like that. But mostly I'm focused on core gameplay and action, like jumping, shooting, dashing, hitting something, that kind of stuff. And I think my definition of fun would be something that is enjoyable, repeatable, and rewarding. So in any game where you have a jump, let's say, or any game where you shoot a gun. So shooting a gun, basically you press the trigger, you press a button, you do something, and the bullet comes out of your gun, probably your character's gun, and it goes forward. That's something. Probably hits an enemy or something. But you can make that really enjoyable and rewarding by adding post-processing effects, maybe by adding screen shakes, by adding freeze frames, by adding tons of stuff, what is usually called micro interactions. So it's the idea that all these tiny things, by adding details to that, you make it fun. A good example of that outside of games would be when you like something on Twitter. They could just have said, okay, you liked it, and just have a message, some sort of feedback to the user that says the action worked. But instead you have this tiny heart and it sort of explodes into bubbles. And that makes it fun, that makes it surprising. And you want to do that again. And of course, that's their business model, engagement. So the more people like stuff on Twitter, the more ads they will see and the more money they make. So everybody's happy. And in games, that's exactly the same thing. You want to make core actions, the actions that you want your user, your player to do a lot, you want to make them extremely enjoyable. And so that's all that sum of tiny details that most people won't be able to pinpoint really. They will be like, throwing an axe in God of War is fun.
Right.
Because when you throw the axe, there are tons of tiny details and there's haptic feedback on the controller. A screen shake, the camera moves a bit. It's very cleverly done. And in the end, people would just say it's fun, but actually it's a sum of tiny, tiny details.
That's making me think of this video of yours here on the screen, the first 5 months of prototyping. I'm watching this thing and I'm like, oh my God, that looks fun.
and it just looks fun. I mean, it doesn't even look good or bad. That's usually the idea. What I do when I do prototypes, I try to make them look decent, like not program art, not lead scenes and stuff like that. So it's there's some sort of art direction to it, but I try to keep it separate. The game could be about the one with the cubes going at you. It could be zombies, it could be monsters, it could be anything. It's completely separate from the fantasy of the game. And if it works with cubes, just random cubes jumping at you, then it works. It's probably going to work with awesome monsters, animated, full texture, all that stuff.
So walk me through that a little bit in terms of what are the things you said. There's haptic experience and stuff like that. And then I kind of want to unpack how you got there, because I don't think there's like a degree program for what you do.
Not really. There should be.
Yeah. So walk me through first.
It's really something that I think is lacking in my experience and my very short experience in the world of video games. I've been working there for 2 years now. Before that, I was in complete different fields, but at least not directly working for studios. But it's not a job title. You're not a juice expert. You're not a micro interactions expert or director or something. You, at best, would be UX, I say, but most UX people will still focus on menus and stuff like that. And then you have game designers, but they will focus on the rules. But so nobody really focuses on the juice itself. And I guess the way I came to it was that I was working on websites and after that on mobile apps. And one of the keys in mobile, when you're doing apps or newspapers or for any kind of users, really, usually you want eventually to make money. So whether you're filling a shopping cart or whether you are looking at articles or liking stuff, you want people to engage and to like these interactions. And the way I found that I could improve on that was making every button not every button, but the buttons I wanted the user to use regularly, make them some sort of game. And, instead of just button changes color or something, you make it so that it's very enjoyable. And this has a limit when you do serious apps. You can't have, every time you like an article on a newspaper's app, you can't have the screen explode in fireworks. For some reason, people don't like that. But in games you can. And the idea was that I started focusing on that. I started seeing the value in that, because I realized that what comes naturally to me, I get these things quickly. Every time I see a new post-processing effect, some way to deform the screen, for example, I'm like, okay, this can be used as feedback to an action made by the player. And I started creating libraries that allow me to do that more quickly. And I got results. I got data that showed that even as prototypes, if you add these sort of visual feedbacks or haptic feedbacks or sound, you get much better results. And so I started really focusing on that and trying to find every day new ways, new tools for the toolbox. And that's how I got there. I guess the whole idea is that I used to do UX design. So the idea of the whole user experience and trying one of the core pillars, at least the one I focused on, was the idea of every action should have a back. And it's the idea that if you play a game or if you use an app or if you do whatever, you have to understand the rules. So if you click on the mouse, usually you hear a tiny sound, and that sound tells you, okay, you clicked. And there's also the movement of the physical part of the mouse that clicks. So all that tells you, okay, your action had consequences. And if, when building a product, if you make sure that the user understands that each of their actions has an effect, chances are your product is going to be at least usable. I'm not saying it's going to be good, but at least this will be covered. And a lot of products actually don't do that or forget places where they could have improved on that. So that was how I was doing apps. That's now how I am doing games.
You mentioned micro interactions, and you've basically spent time building a library like screen shake and different things like that. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I would say that now I have something like 40 of them at the ready. This goes from visual stuff like, screen shakes, flashes on screen, but can also be color grading, depth of field, that kind of stuff. So really a lot of post-processing, but I can also have an object flicker or affect its material in many ways. I can have an object simply shake or bounce or change its scale. Or then there's also a lot of stuff that can be done on sounds, even modifying an actual sound to get a different, let's say you play on the pitch of the sound. So every time you touch a ball in a game, it makes tiny different sounds. So you want to do that again. There's a lot of randomness involved, but it can also be haptic feedback. That's one of my passions. Like it's the idea that every time you, for example, on Twitter or Facebook, when you refresh your feed, you get a tiny vibration. It's not like an alarm vibration. It's extremely low, but usually you'll feel it and you'll be like, okay, so I touched this perfectly flat glass surface and it had an action. And it's not even a sound, it's not even visual, it's just a vibration in your hand. And all that toolbox can be used. And when you use that in conjunction with one another, with proper timing, then you get something that is like a toy and it's fun to play with.
When you're prototyping, especially I'm looking at these scenes or like even urban planning, when you're prototyping and you're building these, outside of the time that it takes to make these happen, what's your primary focus, like in terms of a job? So if somebody was going to do this for a job and you sit down and you're building this, are you building like, does a director come in here with an idea, or is your job just literally like, president of fun?
So when I do like urban planning, that's a game jam game. So I did it on my own. So in this case, I'm president of everything. But at work or when working for studios, usually the idea comes from someone else or many people even. I used to work at Game Loft Montreal before Ubisoft, and there I would work for many teams, while at Ubisoft I'm focused on one game. So, but in both situations, the idea comes from different people. So they have an idea for a giant game, and they say, I simplified it. Basically, they say, hey, we want to make sure this game is fun. And can you do a prototype to see how it goes? Because for now, I have this idea in my head. It looks good on paper. It looks promising. People are interested in pirates and dropships or whatever. And we want to make sure it works. So usually what I do is I talk to that person that has vision, and try to scope things down, because of course, in the final game, there will be dragons, there will be tons of soldiers and stuff and missions and quests and whatnot. But what is the core pillar or the core pillars of the game? And that can be fighting, that can be jumping, that can be running. So we try to see how much we can remove, and we try to get to the very core value of the game, and then we make prototypes around that.
Got it. Okay. So, and around specific scenes or specific actions that are going to happen, because I'm imagining, I guess the other part of this is the whole production of games is still kind of an unknown. Like everybody knows film, you have a director, you have writers, you got actors, you got a cinematographer, there's an award ceremony for them. And so we know that these are all the elements, but games is still unknown in terms of how there's a game director, but what does a game director do? Would the average person be able to say? I'm not entirely confident. So are you working with directors? Or are you working with producers, executives?
Usually it would be the game director. So the game director is someone that is usually at the core of the idea. Like it was their idea to do a game about dragons, and they would be in charge of holding that vision, making sure the game stays on track, and finding the right people, discussing with probably stakeholders. So that would be a game director. And sometimes they do just that. Sometimes they do also art direction, depending on the size of the teams and so on. I rarely talk to execs, not directly. I try to get only one person, ideally the game director, and then I work with a very small team, four people max, usually with profiles like tech artists, VFX artists, people that are able to do a game on their own because they know how to code, they know how to create basic models, stuff like that. So people that have many skills.
Got it. And so I'm going to start with this question, and then I want to get into a little bit of the how, if you're open to that in terms of platforms. But is this a job that's out there, somebody that the industry is in need of right now?
I think it's in need of it. I don't think it knows it.
Okay,
most of the time people don't even do prototypes, or they think they do prototypes, but what they do is production for 2 years. And what I do is really on a different scale in terms of time, in terms of scope, which it's much smaller, but you get much more. And that's not something I invented. That's how most apps that you see on the App Store are created in San Francisco. You create an MVP, minimum viable product, and you get it out extremely fast and test it in the hands of users. That's not really something I've seen much in the studios.
That makes sense, but I'm sure that's coming.
I hope it is. I think it is.
So talk to me about the how, because you said you come from a background in coding, but you're also an artist.
Yeah. So I studied computing like 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that I used to draw as a kid, but like really badly. And at some point during my studies, I bought a Wacom tablet, or not even a Wacom really. It was a crappy one. And I started drawing, started posting stuff on forums, because back in the day we didn't have social networks. And I was really, really bad at it, but I had the chance of having people criticize my stuff. I was on a forum called CFSL in France, and huge, people that are really extremely famous in the industry now, working on films, working on video games. I used to post on that forum, and it was only like 200 or 300 people. So you would get advice from the best. So I tried again, trying to sort of impress these people. And that's how I built my Illustrator career. And on the side, I was doing programming and doing web design, really app design, interface design, and coding. And the idea was that being able to code, even when working on website or apps, being able to code, being able to do stuff in Photoshop, that gave me a lot of leeway to try new things. And I think it opens a lot of opportunities when you don't have to rely on either an artist or either a programmer to get something out. So if you have a vision for a product, a vision for a game, a vision for anything, if you're able to do it all on your own at a satisfying level, then it opens a lot of doors because you don't rely on anyone. And when working, being able to on your own show a vision of what you have and an interactive one, ideally, that's usually something that works for you.
What kind of development tools do you use? Do you go straight into Unity? Because you also mentioned somebody to do what you do, that there's an aspect of code to this. And now I think, was it Snapchat? I think Snapchat just bought a game development platform. I mean, a simple one, a Playground, I think, if I remember right. So what tools do you use?
I do 90% of my stuff in Unity.
Okay.
Back in the day, I was using Flash, and something like 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to get back into games, or at least just for myself and doing game jams. So I started with Unity because it was starting to get traction at the time. Turns out it's a really wonderful tool, and you can do a lot in it, even if you don't know how to code. So I'm fortunate enough to know how to code, so I don't have to rely on visual tools and stuff. But even if you don't know how to code, you can have a lot of fun with Unity. And it's very much self-contained. So you have support for animations, for shaders, for everything you want to do in terms of code. So it's a wonderful tool and extremely accessible, much more than anything that came before. So I use Unity for pretty much everything. I do my 2D art in Photoshop, my 3D art in Blender. Music I do on the iPad mostly, using apps like Figure and stuff like that. And that's pretty much it.
You do the music yourself?
Yeah. I wouldn't call it music, but it's sounds that are okay. When I do sound design, it's mostly with apps, very simple apps that you sort of press buttons, but it always works somehow because they stick to a rhythm and everything. So
right.
You can't really go wrong with that.
Got it. Is there one that you use? You said Figure?
Yeah. It's made by the Propeller Heads people, who I think was in the 90s. And it's really fun. It's basically a game, and you just move buttons and do stuff, and it always sounds really good.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think there was a game like that my kids were playing with the other day in the back of the car, and I was like, my son's a DJ. What the heck? This is good. All right, so in terms of the output, what I'm trying to do is get a little bit of a granular perspective. So if we take a look at, let's take a look at not this one, but like let's say your not the baker. I liked the smallest dungeon. So when you're creating these in terms of the smallest dungeon, are the characters in 3D, 2D?
These are in 2D. I think the scene is in 3D, but they are technically in 2D. I'm using Spine to animate them. So they are like drawn in Photoshop on separate layers. Let's take the penguin here. He will have a body, 2 arms, and I think the legs are 2 parts each. And then I bring that into Spine, which is an animation tool, very puppet-like. And I read that and animate the bones, do walk cycles and stuff like that. And the really cool thing with Spine is that you can replace one skin with another. So actually all the enemies, and maybe even the main characters, I can't remember, but I think pretty much all the characters in the game are using the same skeleton and the same animations. So I only did like one walk cycle, one idle, one attack. Mm-hmm. And I can just replace the PNGs and I get the new character. And the cool thing with Spine and Unity is that you get a runtime. So an API that you can use to tweak the bones at runtime. So you can randomly say, hey, now you've got a big head, or you're moving twice as fast, or you randomly assemble a character mixing arms and legs and bodies from different ones. So you get a lot of content out of minimum effort, which is something I'm always after because I try to work in very short time frames. So if I can find the tool that allows me to generate tons of stuff, then of course it's a win.
That's great to hear. Hearing the plug, because I know Unity is one of those, it's very plug-in and asset dependent,
Yes.
So that's great to hear the actual ones. Let me ask this, especially the work that you do. I think I'm really interested in your question to this, but what is art in your perspective?
That's a really good question. One I don't ask myself very often. I think what I do is I never considered myself an artist. I do applied art, like production art. I never do art just for the sake of it, or rarely. There's always a motive, whether it's going to be an illustration for the cover of an album, or comics, or video games, or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really have an answer to that. I would say what I do is not art, really, not in the sense that usually people think about. I do like dressing on top of products to make people like them.
Got it. And it sounds like gameplay and fun is like that's just at the core of the whole experience for you.
Yes, I really believe that a game, but I think that I was doing that even when I was doing illustrations. I never reached the point where I would consider myself extremely good at drawing or proportions or stuff like that. But I compensate by trying to have fun, and offering something that hasn't been done before, seen before, like tiny jokes, or something unique or a unique spin to something you've already seen, like the Game of Thrones sigil or stuff like that, and trying to tell the story even with one image that doesn't move, doesn't have words. I think that's what I was trying to do, and I think it was already fun, or trying to be. And games, I could play games that don't even have visuals if they are fun. I don't think I would play a game that is just, I've tried many beautiful games that are extremely boring because there's no fun parts. And personally, I think if your game is fun, chances are it's going to work. If it's just beautiful, maybe it will work, maybe not.
Game isn't known necessarily as for story. That's cinema. Cinema is known for story. But how important is story to this? Because that's the thing that I've been hearing a lot is that story is really kind of the last part of it. Is that accurate or no?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, in my experience as a player, I've never been really moved by a story in a game like I have in movies. I could name tons of movies that have changed my visions of things or have me experience something unique, and books and TV series. But games, the story is okay at best. There must be some, braid and stuff like that would be exceptions to the rules. But most of the time I'm like, okay, the story is all right. And it would be fine for a TV movie in the 90s. I think it's something that could be improved. I don't really know why it's always so disappointing to me. I guess that's because people focus, studios focus on the visuals first, focus on creating huge worlds, and rarely on stories. I mean, there are exceptions like Witcher 3, stuff like that is, I think, brilliant. But most of the time, I recently played the last Mortal Kombat game, and that's not the one where you would expect a brilliant story. And I think they know it, that the story is fun and treated as like a Z movie. But, why not come up with an actual good story? And in my experience, it really always comes last, or there isn't enough effort put into it, or all the other departments, art, programming and stuff, treat it as some sort of bonus. So it's just on the side and not at the core of the experience.
So I'm wondering now, because a lot of my students, one of the big things we teach is you want to include a story in what you do, partly because, if we're doing 3D, you've got to do the wear and tear. So you have to have some story to know how a cabinet's used so that you can have an authentic experience to it. But stepping outside of that entirely, what kind of tips or advice can you have for somebody if they want to produce a game quick and they just want to get in and they want to start to have some experience with what you do, the gameplay, the juice? I think you called it the juice, right?
Yeah, I think that the first advice would be to try and keep your scope extremely small. Creating a game is long, takes tons of time. The more features you add to the game, the more bugs you're going to create. That's like whatever your level, that's a general rule. So keep things small. And then to do that, to decide on that scope, the best way I think to prioritize it is to say, okay, in my game, players will walk, they're going to jump, and they're going to shoot at stuff. Then they are going to open doors and crawl through stuff and so on. But you prioritize by the order of order the frequency the action is being done.
Okay.
And so if you walk in that order, you walk, jump, and shoot. Then you focus on making the walking work, and then you do the jumping, and then you do the shooting, and you stop there. Like that's way enough. The rest is secondary, and if you manage to nail that, chances are you won't have any issue with opening a door. And try to keep it as small as possible. Like jumping and walking and shooting doesn't require an animation. In the end, it will, but it should be fun with a cube or a triangle or something. And if you manage to make it work with a cube, then replacing that with an actual textured character should be working as well. So try to keep it lo-fi as possible while maintaining a certain level of understanding for the player. Like if you have some sort of vehicle that is like a car racing in the desert, you want probably to have some sort of direction. So maybe instead of a cube, you go with an arrow or you go with something like that. And it's the idea that this very minimal product should be able to work. And then I guess it's about picking the right tools for the job. I would recommend Unity, but really whatever works. It could be paper and pen. It could be game maker. It doesn't really matter. I'm more interested in the result than the tools.
Got it. Keep it small, keep the scope small, keep it as lo-fi as possible. The scope is something I want to kind of unpack, but the other thing is you said the tools. And since Unity has a lot of plugins and what I'm seeing with your work especially, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's there for me, they're aesthetically beautiful. Like it's just awesome to see. So, are you using plugins? I think it's Amplify was one for the shading, or what are you using to kind of develop these looks and whatnot?
So most of the time, I tend to stick to very basic tools. I rarely go into shaders. First of all, because it's complex and I'm really bad at it, and second of all, because it just takes too much time. And most of the time, unless you get something really specific, like you need an ocean surface, you need waves and stuff like that, or you need flames, and it's core to your gameplay. I don't do that. I would just, if the game is on water, I would go with a cube, a blue one, and I set its transparency to 50% or something. And now it's water. Someone else later will come up with an actual water shader. So what I usually use is something called Cinemachine, which is it was an external plugin and it got bought by Unity. So now it's sort of built in the package manager. And handles cameras. And once you are used to using that thing, you don't ever code a camera controller ever again. It can do amazing things, blend between cameras. It's extremely easy to use and extremely powerful. So that's something I use in all of my projects, and it has the benefit of being free now. So that's a plus. And I also use Unity's post-processing stack. So that's a bunch of post-processing effects like color grading, depth of field, blur, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And these, when used properly, vignette, things like that, you get something that looks good instantly. And as soon as you manage to put a few lights in your scene, even if it's a plane and a few cubes and a ball with lights, a camera that slightly shakes, because there's a noise on it, because it looks like it's being handheld, and post-processing, you've got something working.
All right. So Cinemachine, are there any other plugins that you kind of recommend that are kind of essential?
The one I use a lot at work is called Odin. It's something that handles serialization and stuff. So if you're a programmer, I would recommend using that. If you're not, you're going to waste your money because you're not going to understand what it's for. There is one that I never use myself. I prefer coding like with actual letters and and typing the code, but there's something called Bolt, and it's a visual tool. So if you don't know programming, it's I think extremely useful because it's going to be about assembling visual blocks of code and linking them together. And I've seen people with zero knowledge of programming get amazing results with that and very quickly. I think, in my opinion, there's a limit to what you can do with that because it just becomes too big. And I myself can't really comprehend giant sets of nodes. But if it works for you, then you should go for it.
Got it.
And the last tool I would mention is not even part of Unity, but it's Houdini. That's completely separate software, but same sort of thing, same logic where you assemble stuff with nodes, and it's so powerful and it can do amazing things in a very short time.
Houdini is a part of your package, part of your pipeline?
Yeah, very much. We use that for generating a lot of stuff in a very short time without anyone knowing 3D modeling. So you can use it for generating levels. I've generated racetracks, castles, mazes. You can do tons of stuff with it.
Yeah, got any examples?
I think in the video, the first 5 months, I think it's the name of the video. You would see some of them. Yeah, for example, this level basically is generated with Houdini completely. So what we wanted for this game was the idea that it was like a board game. So you see tiles and there's a map on it, a pirate map or something. Mm-hmm. And every time the player clicks on one of the tiles, it sort of turns around and reveals what's under it. And that would be water and maybe a bit of an island and trees. And we wanted to be able to create a lot of different situations. And none of us had any idea of, and it was a really small team. And we didn't really have time to model islands and trees and so on. So we had someone on the team that knew Houdini, like he's an expert at it. And he generated something, created a tool that takes an image, black and white, so you can draw any sort of map or any shape. It takes that, turns it into elevation, puts, like the textures at the right place. So I think it's all vertex color, but you get beaches and you get grass and you get all sorts of trees and random elements. And it also cuts that into pieces and does everything basically. So you could draw a house on paper, take a photo of that with your phone, put it into Houdini, and boom, like 5 seconds later, you get a giant world made in the shape of your drawing.
That sounds pretty powerful. Wow.
It is game-changing, really.
Yeah. The industry's changing so much. So I got a question for you along those lines. Then I want to hear a little bit about what's the hardest part of what you do. But before we do that, the industry's changing so much, and there's so many tools that are developing, and now prototyping, which is, I think you're telling me is what you do is still relatively new in this industry. But along those lines, it brings up things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and I was looking recently. I saw Facebook's Codex avatars. I don't know if you've seen the article on that. It's long since papers, but it's all artificial intelligence recreating somebody's face from a bunch of videos, and then they get a soundtrack and they just recreate it. It's pretty awesome.
It is
what's happening. Yeah. So how does this impact artists? Because here I'm looking at this tool right here. You guys are an environment artists, and somebody basically wrote an environment artist out of a job for a little bit and did it in an awesome way. How do you see this stuff impacting the art side of it? I'm dramatizing the whole artist versus machine thing, but how do you see this impacting arts and the art side of it?
I think it's going to have a dramatic impact. I think it already has, and it's going to be more visible and more, I wouldn't say damaging, because I think people will just do something else instead, but it is going to have an impact. And anybody that thinks that because they are doing something creative, a machine can do it, I think they are wrong. Just because a machine doesn't really create or things like that, it just tries everything. But it does it so fast that it's doing it, even if it's random, at some point it's going to be better than you just by chance. I did a lot of work last year with Unity and AI. I trained cars to do races. I trained hawks to walk. I did random stuff like that. And it is extremely powerful. I know nothing about AI. And it's come to a point where you get so much power and it's so accessible that someone with an actual knowledge and not doing just random stuff like I am doing, but you can do crazy stuff right now. I believe in 10 years, you'll do, the stuff will do itself, like, for example, for art, already in studios, you'll see people that come up with an idea for a game. And instead of just saying, hey, we've got this amazing digital painter or concept artist, and let's have that person do something really cool. Now you ask many people to do many different styles, and you test them on Facebook using ads and so on, and you get data, and you take your decisions based on that. So maybe you wanted to see if a very dark cyber thing looking style for your game was okay, but it turns out people prefer cowboys, so you go with the cowboys. And for now, all this test art is being done by humans, but it could very well be automated. And with the infrastructure that is already in place, it's quite doable to create tons of options and A/B test them like in real time and see if it works or not. I did that on games even, like I did that for level design. So you have, using Houdini actually, you just generate random mazes. You have people play them. So you as long as you have maybe thousands of players, you just randomly serve all these levels. Will have a bad experience at first, but at the end, you ask the players, hey, did you like the level? They put a rating on that. And you sort of sort all your levels out on their own, and the machine can do that completely. So you just generate tons of options, see if people like that, and it sort of fixes itself. It's already being done on YouTube videos, for example. You have these weird companies. I've never really understood the model. I guess it's just about views and ads. And then they generate videos for kids. So it's like cartoons and weird sounds, and they just generate so much of it that in the end it sort of works. And of course it's ugly right now, but I mean, every week there's a new AI experiment that draws for you, that does colors for you, that, does new stuff. And yeah, you were talking about the videos, you look at the deep facing. Yeah, you look at the Marvel movies, where you can sort of resuscitate actors now, or at least make them way younger. All that is coming in the hands of pretty much everyone in the next 10 years. And just playing, last night I was with my kid, I was playing with Snapchat filters, where you can just turn into a dog or something. And if you look at the latest Apple emojis that you sort of control with your face, you've got something that is on par with kid shows that I see on Netflix. So all that is becoming extremely accessible, won't require as much knowledge, and I think it affects every creative job.
When I worked at Pixelogic, we were heralded as revolutionizing digital sculpting, and we did things like ILM had tried to do it before us, and they literally declared it was impossible to do. And then Ofer made it happen, right? Because he was singularly focused. And I mean, he had to do his own machine code. He rewrote the memory management routines for Windows. He did a lot of work to make that happen. Stuff they probably would have assumed wasn't. But the downside, the dark side to that is people don't realize that thousands of traditional sculptors lost their jobs.
Yeah.
And that's they just flat lost their jobs. That was it. And there's literally nothing to do. And if there were several that went to go work at the U.S. Mint, but the U.S. Mint has like 6 people, and that's it.
Yeah,
if you work at the U.S. Mint, you're gold, but if not, you're screwed.
I think it's scary. I mean, even what I do could very well disappear. I generate ideas. I take an idea for a game and I do a few combinations. I'm fast, but like in a week I can do maybe 4 variations of a game, and a program could absolutely generate much more. And if you get a test group of maybe 100,000 people, then you can test these ideas and see which ones stick. And based on that, you improve and improve and improve and refine. And yeah, you could absolutely automate prototyping. I hope, there will be, if you look at history and you look at the Industrial Revolution, I think everyone is happier. Maybe, or at least, you could say that people are happier now that we have machines and you don't have to walk for years to go from one point of the earth to the other. But hopefully, this will create a better world. I have serious doubts about it.
I think it's also easy for people to, this whole creativity, the man in the machine thing is, I'm traditionally trained as a traditional artist, and that just means, for the most part, means in 18th century, 16th century methodologies. And it's easy to forget that that's just filled with rules. To learn how to draw properly in the 18th century atelier fashion, it's all about rules. And
Absolutely.
You're putting those rules not just in your eye. That's the problem. It's easy to just be able to see it. You got to put those rules into your biology so that you can actually produce it with your biology, with your hands. And you can, and that takes years of time.
Yeah.
And if I remember right, that's the big argument that people have with the singularity, which is Ray Kurzweil, which is at a certain point, the machine outstrips biology in terms of its ability to adapt. It'll be able to run through iterations significantly faster than biology can evolve, right?
Yeah. I can't imagine that not happening at some point in time. It seems inevitable to me. Not saying in our lifetime, but maybe our children's or sometime in the future. If we don't destroy them for that.
Yeah, so why I'm trying to teach my daughter to program, so at least she can put a good word into the overlords for us, right?
Yeah. That'd be nice.
Yes. Talk to me about style transfer markup language. Have you been experimenting with that at all? I only heard about it recently with Stadia, but I know it's part of AI and whatnot.
Yeah,
is that?
I tried a few things, but on the internet, as a random user.
Mm-hmm.
I saw what they did with Stadia, and so far I'm not convinced.
Yeah, I wasn't convinced either.
Again, I think it's the very start. It's the very first thing. And I think what they showed on stage was very much just for show, something very extreme so that people understand what they mean. But if you a bit more subtly, you could take a game like Borderlands and serve that to tons of players and figure out what width of the outlines works best.
Right.
You say, hey, do we need more contrast? And you don't even have to ask people what they think. You can just say, hey, we noticed that if the outlines are 5 pixels wide instead of 4, then people stay for 5 minutes more. Unlikely, but you get the idea. So with that kind of access to data, and I mean, it's already in place. That's how Facebook works, and every game company does that as well. You collect data, and how well you act on that depends on the company, but collecting the data is super simple, and treating it is becoming extremely simple as well. So you could automate all that and just say, hey, let's have the system try different art styles or variation of the art style and transferring stuff. That is something that is going to happen. It is going to happen to a point, to a certain point. And I would recommend, if you're starting in that industry or anything digital art related, try to focus on something that is not just pushing pixels or pushing vertices. I was playing with the new Zero Mesh of ZBrush yesterday, and I've been trying to learn how to do retopology myself, by hand, for a while, and every time I get discouraged because I'm like, it just takes too long. And I've seen colleagues do that, that's their job. And when I see the latest version of it, I'm like, wow, that you're going to be out of a job soon, if you just do that.
Yes.
It's getting to a point where I don't have high expectations for my retopology on my 3D models myself, but I'm at a point where clicking the button does it well enough for me. And I'm honestly actually surprised it didn't get to that point earlier, because it looks very mechanical to me, but I'm pretty sure I'm missing the point on retopology and have all of that. But yeah, you should focus on something try to find something that a machine won't be able to do in the next 10 years.
Yeah, well, along those lines, because
bet.
I know we took this conversation down a little bit of a dark path, so we can take a breath, because I think that reminds us of the real thing, right? Like, of course, there's a threat to the job, but I mean, there's a threat to the immediate jobs. This job could go to India, or the India job could come back to the States. It's like I've seen both sides of that conversation happen. I saw EA take an entire studio to China and then be like, well, that sucked, and bring it right back. So, that kind of stuff happens, and there's threats left, right, and center. So those are all part of the deal. But I see here, in your work, and I'll just talk about your work for a second, but you have a firm grasp of what works. And so if we look at the dog, right, the walking dog, there's gradients, it's color, it's attractive, simple lines. There's a sense of craft behind that. And the craft is, I think, the thing that really at the end of the day, is so important. And your craft seems to be the juice, like getting people into it. So I really appreciate the insights that you have and that you've shared with us. So I want to open this up right now for everybody. If you guys got some questions, both about the coming Singularity and Doom, or anything else.
I'm really not expert on that part, so my opinion is really I wouldn't value it too much.
Yeah. When in my boot camp, for example, we train people not to focus on retopology, because I know it's a job that's going away, but it's a job that's been going away for 10 years. It's just the coders, finally somebody, Ofer, decided he was going to invest in it. He bought the solution from basically a graduate student. And then the graduate students just, they're developing it and making it better and better. Autodesk never cared about us, but Pixelogic did. So somebody's deciding to invest in it. But what I tell them is, if you're spending more than a week on the retopology, then you're wasting your time. Automate it, decimate it. Houdini is amazing with decimation. Z-Remesh is amazing, but it doesn't. There's still some cooler things that Houdini can do. So you've got to get to the craft. You've got to make this thing beautiful, because that's what you got to shock somebody into noticing your work.
Yes.
So what do you think are the ingredients of the keys? Because you've been in games now for a couple of years. Before that, you were in an industry where you had to get people's attention fast. What do you think are the keys for artists, your colleagues? What are the things that we've got to do to make sure that we're catching people's attention? And, that includes our portfolio for people who are just starting out, things like that.
I think one of the advice I would give is to try to keep things simple. That works for prototypes, also works for art. And I see many people, and I'm guilty of that a lot, try to compensate for stuff by adding more stuff. Because you don't have iconic silhouettes, you don't have iconic shapes, you don't have something that works, you just add more stuff to it. And you add pouches, you add random stuff. And especially in 3D, you'll see people that go with extreme textures and very, very detailed tessellation and stuff like that. And maybe try to keep things simple. I think in character design, stuff like Street Fighter just really works. You can reduce Street Fighter to a pile of Lego bricks, and it's still Ryu and Ken and well, and that's really good character design because it's simple. The more stuff you're going to add, it's not going to work.
Got it. And then the last question I want to ask you is, do you have any tips, any places, anything you advise for artists who are looking to kind of bone up on the programming side of it, both to speak to the future overlords, but also because I find programming and just even scripting, like we could just talk scripting based, so just learning some Python increases your skill set, your capacity quite a bit. Any recommendations?
I would say training, like do it a lot. There's no two ways around it. I think if you want to learn Unity in particular, they have a part of the website called /learn or something, full tutorials. I would recommend picking something simple. I see a lot of people trying to get into scripting or game programming that are like, hey, I'm going to do an MMO and it's going to have billions of characters. Nah, just do Snake, do Pac-Man. Even Pac-Man, it's actually quite tricky. Do something simple. A ball that bounces, and take baby steps, because otherwise you're going to get overwhelmed by the size of things. Like everything, it has become very complex making a game. If you look at any AAA game, like it's a massive enterprise. So start with something extremely small. Doesn't have to look good. It doesn't have to be impressive. It has to be fun, and you can do that with a few lines of code. So that would be, I think, the easiest way to have a chance to keep going. And if you start with these baby steps, you will get more knowledge that you can apply to your art. The first few things I was doing with programming and art, I was generating combinations of images. So clients would order, avatars for social games and stuff like that. And I would just do stuff in Photoshop, do 10 eyes and 10 noses and 10 mouths, and I would just code a program that assembles all that. And I was able to sell that to the same price that I would have if I had done it by hand. But it took only a fraction of the time. And I think you can do that with 3D as well. You can do that with pretty much everything in art. Some would say it reduces the value of the art, but if you like money, it works.
Fair enough. Is the game I'm looking at here, because I kind of want to build this myself. I want to do a test on. Is this something you'd consider limited in scope, the guy who's shooting the blocks, or is this got complexity that I'm not seeing?
No, if you're very new at programming, it's already a challenge. If you have maybe 100 of hours of training, or maybe 50 hours, I don't know. This would not be something I would recommend to a complete beginner.
Mm-hmm.
Try with just have something moving and see how it goes, because it already implies projectiles and collisions and AI. So there's already a lot. If you're completely new, I would say have something. Create Mario. You can move left and right and you can jump.
Right, got it. All right, Renaud, thank you so much for your time and for sharing this, man. It's really great to get outside of our box, and I really appreciate you sharing what you do.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was really cool.
All right. So I want to thank you so much for being here, for taking the time, and for listening to this podcast. And I want to ask a couple of things from you. Number one, make sure you leave a comment or you rate this on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever it is that you're getting this. That's going to make a big difference in helping us get the word out and get people to know who we are. All right. The other thing is I want to make sure you know where to find us. So you can head over to www.gameartinstitute.com, where you can learn about our flagship program, which is the Game Artist Bootcamp. This is designed for those who are really looking to move the needle on their career and really lock in that job. You may have gone to school and learned a bunch, maybe haven't learned a bunch. But at the Game Art Institute, the primary focus we have is the very specific industry skills, the triggers that you really need to hit in that job interview. What are the specific things that they're looking for? That's what we're going to be training you on. We're taking applications right now for environment artists and for character artists. So make sure you head over to www.gameartinstitute.com and apply today. That way we can have that conversation, make sure this is a fit for you, make sure that you're a fit for it, and if everything is perfect, then we will sign you up for that right away and get you into your training and start moving the needle on your career. All right, thank you so much again for being here. Take care, have an amazing day.